Good evening and welcome back to Torah Tuesday. I am so glad you're here. We are stepping into a new book of the Torah, what is commonly known as Numbers, the book of Numbers. But what it's called in the Hebrew is Midbar. And the name Midbar means in the desert. And today we're covering Numbers chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through chapter 4 and verse 20. Numbers, for some people, they find it a little bit challenging because it's always talking about numbers, like a math class. It's like a census, you could think of it as, there's a lot of counting. But I want you, so when we think of numbers, you do think of counting, you think of the census, that's what you automatically think of. But the Hebrew name says something completely different. So midbar, like I said, means in the wilderness or in the desert. And the book, it doesn't begin with a destination. It actually begins in the hard place, in the dry ground. It deals with the in between, the in between that a lot of us face today. So it doesn't start with them in the promised land. It actually starts with them in that dry place. And what does God do in the in between? He counts, he orders, he assigns. He doesn't wait for the comfort of Canaan to tell Israel who they are. He speaks to their identity, their position, and their calling right there in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the wilderness, because that is where his people are at the moment. And if you are in a wilderness season right now, and you may feel like you're in that in between, you're in between, you're no longer where you were, but you're not quite sure or have arrived to the place of where you're going. You're between the promise that was given and the fulfillment of that promise. I think you will find some appreciation in this Torah portion. You know, God didn't leave Israel to wander without any kind of form or structure. He said to them, I know your name, I know your tribe, I know who your family is, and I know exactly where you stand within my camp. And then he gave them assigned tasks to do. And that is what Midbar is. It's not just a book about logistics, it is about identity, position, and calling. And that's how I want you to look at numbers with that fresh perspective, because this is what God did while they were actually in the wilderness. So I pray now, Father, I pray now that you bless everyone under the sound of my voice. Father, I pray that you open up their eyes, their ears, and their hearts to receive the truth of your word. And Father, I pray even more that you began to speak to their identity and their position and their calling as they listen to this lesson. None of me, but all of you, Father, in your Son, Yeshua's name, I pray. Amen. So go ahead, grab your Bible, grab your pen, a notebook, whatever you are going to use, and let's go ahead and get started. So again, we're going to cover approximately 4 chapters, not all of chapter 4, but from up till verse 20. And I want to give you like the map where we're going and what this portion contains. So chapter 1 is the census. God commands Moses to count every man of fighting age, and he tells them to call them by name, by tribe, and by family. And we read there's approximately 603,550 individual names in the record of God. And that is just again the men of fighting age. The Levites, you're going to read that they're deliberately excluded from the count. And then I don't want you to think it's because they are less than, but because they have a totally different assignment. And we're going to get into that as well. So that's chapter one. And then in chapter two, we're going to understand about the camp order. Every tribe has a specific position around the tabernacle, north, south, east, west. And each tribe has their own banner. And the tabernacle is right there in the center. And it's not really optional where they're landing. It's a formation. It's something that God has assigned to them. And then in chapter three, we're going to go ahead and we're going to read about where the Levites received their assignment. You know, God claimed the Levites as his own in place of the firstborn of Israel. And so there are three Levitical clans we're going to read about that's positioned around the tabernacle, and they have specific responsibility for what they're going to do. And I just want to make sure I'm pulling my Bible here. I normally use the Legacy Standard Bible, but today I have the ESV in front of me, and that's what we're going to go with. And then finally, in chapter four, it narrows it down even further. You're going to see that each clan receive a specific inventory of items that they're responsible for. You have the Kohathites, they carry the most holy things. You have the Gershonites, they carry the curtains and the coverings, and the Merarites, they carry the frames, the bases. So every family had a task and their names were recorded. And so the name Midbar means in the wilderness, and God does not wait for that promised land. He doesn't wait for Canaan to establish the order. He doesn't wait. So again, identity, position, and assignment are spoken over his people while they're in the desert. And do you know that God also speaks over you in the desert? You know, the desert is not for nothing. The desert has purpose, and it's how you navigate the desert that determines the outcome, quite frankly. So you see here, we're going to go to Numbers chapter 1. You have been counted. And the thing is, you're counted by name, by family, by tribe, by position. And that's what chapters one and two are about. You know, they belong together because you're going to read about their identity and their location. So before Israel takes even one step, God answers two questions, you know, for every person that's in that camp. Who are you and where do you stand? Who are you? And where do you stand? And these are not just only questions for back then. There are questions that God is still answering for his people today. Who are you and where do you stand? What is your identity and what is your position? And so you have to understand that you are not a victim of your own circumstances. You are a member of a covenant community, and you have a specific name, you have a specific lineage, and a specific place in God's camp. And then, you know, that's your identity. But what about where you stand? What about your position? Do you stand? Is your position based on your identity? So God has assigned you a place, and the place where you are standing is in relation to the presence which determines how you advance in the mission that he has assigned for you. So again, don't look at this as just a book of numbers. Begin to change your perspective as you get into this lesson. Again, we're in numbers. So sorry, I'm just getting there now. Going to go ahead and advance. So Numbers chapter 1. It is God telling Moses, literally count head by head. He didn't say count the people. This is not, you have to understand the Hebrew words that are used. He said count every individual. So this was not a crowd. This was a person by person reckoning, and he gave them their names, right? So in other words, individually, this is who you are and this is how you're positioned. So every tribe had a designated leader who helped Moses and Aaron conduct that census, to conduct the count. And there were representatives of each tribe, and they walked through and they named every man of fighting age. So this was quite personal. It was personal. It was very specific and it was relational. So the number 603,550 means the total Israelite population. So if you, and that was just men of fighting age. So if you begin to include women, children, and the Levites, that was probably what people believed to be well over 2 million people. 2 million people who had been enslaved in Egypt, and God knew every single name. That ought to encourage somebody right there. Because out of the millions of people who calls themselves a son and daughter of God, God yet knows your name individually. And so the Levites, they're excluded from this military count. And again, it is not because they were less than, but because their assignment was very different from what the other tribes had. And because being excluded from the military count was, you can't look at it as rejection either. It was a redirection. And again, I hope that speaks to somebody today. You may think, okay, God hasn't called me or God hasn't given me an assignment. No, it's just you are called and you have an assignment. You just have to continue to seek him and don't feel rejection because you don't know your assignment and maybe your friend does. No, it's just a redirection. God is just redirecting you and he will give you an assignment. It is not rejection. And if you look at the New Testament connection to this, where Yeshua says, even the hairs of your head are all numbered. So this is the same language of the census that was applied to you personally. Think about it. The God of Numbers, chapter 1, with this census, with this counting, Luke says he's counting the very strands of hair on your head. So he's still counting. He still names. You have to understand that you are in God's record. So whatever wilderness you are in right now, you have been counted in it. Not after you get through it, but while you're in it. And again, I hope that is encouraging somebody today. Hopefully, you're looking at numbers a bit differently. So, what are some of the principles and applications that we can get from this? God does not do vague. He literally counted Israel by name, by tribe, and by family. And so you have to not consider yourself as a faceless number in the crowd. God knows your name as well. And you are in an army. You are within the army, a covenant army of believers. And you are being set apart, not being left out. Continue to seek God. He knows what He has for you, but everything is in His time. But you're being set apart for His purposes. And finally, your identity is not determined by the wilderness. No, 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 no. Do not become a victim of circumstance. Your identity may be given to you in the wilderness, but it's not determined by the wilderness. The wilderness is like our classroom, it's like a test. And for those of you that join me on Wednesdays, we're learning about how to properly navigate the wilderness so you don't have to stay there longer than you need to stay, so that you don't die in the wilderness, but instead be born in the wilderness. And so now we're going to move on to chapter 2. So, chapter 2, we learn about I want you to picture 600,000 men plus their families, plus the livestock, and they're all arranged in a specific formation around the tabernacle. And each side had three tribes, because remember, there was 12 tribes of Judah. So each side had three tribes, and each side had their own banner. So there was a designated position for each tribe. And then the middle was the tabernacle. In the center of all where they were positioned is the tabernacle. And this is a visible declaration about who is really in the center. And then I said they had a banner. It was a visible marker that identified which group they belonged to. And just like them, your identity is not hidden. It is theirs was displayed, and so is yours. And notice in verse 34, chapter 2 and verse 34, I'm going to read chapter 2 and verse 34 from the ESV. It says, "Thus did the people of Israel, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards, and so they set out, each one in his clan, according to his father's house." So they did according to all that the Lord commanded. They did not negotiate their positions like we try to do today because we're just not satisfied. We're so puffed up and full of pride. We don't like the position that the Lord has given us. But as we read here, they received their place in the formation and they stood there. And what is currently in the center of your formation? Is it your self-satisfaction? Is it your life or your ministry? Or is it the presence of God like it was for Israel? The tabernacle represented the presence of God. And so, what can we learn from chapter 2? So, chapter 2, the presence is the center. And everything organizes around that. Listen, if everything in your life doesn't center itself or organize itself around God and who God is, then it's time to reevaluate some things because every tribe positioned itself in relation to the tabernacle. So you have to make sure that if what you have in your life is not, if the center is not the presence of God, then the formation is wrong. And how you march through this wilderness season, how you march, how you proceed will reflect that God is not the center. And point two, you have to understand that you have a position. You're not just simply participating, you have a position. There is a difference between showing up somewhere and being stationed somewhere. The tribes were not told to just show up near the tabernacle. No, they were told exactly where to stand and exactly which direction to face. And God has a specific post for you as well. Point three, your banner matters. The tribes camped under visible standards. Identity was not a private matter in God's camp. Your covenant identity is supposed to be visible. And then finally, point four, the camp order became the march order. So the position you take in the presence determines how you move in the mission. Let me say that again. The position you take in the presence determines how you move in the mission. And before you advance, get positioned. Before you move, know where you stand in relation to his presence. Get positioned first. And so now we're going to talk about Numbers chapter 3, set apart for the center. So the Levites didn't carry any weapons. They carried the presence of God. That was their assignment. Every other tribe had a military function, but the Levites were exempt from that. And it wasn't because they had no role or anything like that, but it was because their role was more central than any military role could ever be. And when the camp moved, the ark moved. The ark, again, the ark of the covenant. And who carried that ark? Who do we read carried the ark? It was the Levites. So when the tabernacle was set up, the curtains had to be hung, the lampstand had to be lit, the bread of the presence had to be arranged. And who did all of that? Again, it was the Levites. So the most critical function in the entire camp, the critical function of maintaining the presence of God amongst this people, was the assignment of the Levites. And there are people in the body of Messiah whose primary calling is not to lead a charge. Everybody wants to be the greatest. Everybody wants to be out front. Everybody wants to lead. But there are some people in the body whose primary calling is not to lead a charge. Their calling is to tend to the presence. Oh my God, to maintain the worship and to guard what God has set apart as holy. The Levites had to carry what was most holy. And that's not considered a lesser calling because in the structure of Israel's camp, it was the most central one. So let's look at Numbers chapter 3 a little bit. And again, always, we don't go word by word for the sake of time. We don't read all these chapters, but please, as you have time and as you're looking at this lesson, of course, you should always go back and read. I'm going to always say that. So the substitution of the Levites for the firstborn is one of the most important moments in the Torah. So you have to understand that. So let me give you a little bit of the background here. So at the Passover in Egypt, God spared the firstborn of Israel through the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Remember, when God was doing the plagues and he was going to kill the firstborn, in order for Israel to be exempt from that, they had to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. But that act of redemption came with a consequence. Again, every firstborn in Israel now belong to God. So in Numbers chapter 3, God made what we want to call a trade. So instead of taking every firstborn individually, he takes the whole tribe of Levi, and the Levites become the corporate substitution for the firstborn of Israel. And again, it will make sense to you when you begin to read this in full. Again, the Torah is rich. It is rich. I don't know why people stay away from it. And then God does something with the numbers. He counts the firstborn in Israel. So there were 22,273. And then he counts the Levites, and they numbered 22,000. So the numbers are almost exactly matched. There are 273 more firstborn than the Levites. So those 273 are redeemed at 5 shekels each. And so the precision of this accounting says something profound about the character of God. It really does. He does not leave any person unredeemed if he can help it. Remember, he wants all men to come to repentance, but he has given us a free will. Every account is settled and every excess is addressed. You can be one of the number. And then in verse 45, what does he say? So, chapter 3 in verse 45 says, "The Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord. The Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord." So that was a declaration of ownership. He said, "You are mine, and I have claimed you." And then there were three clans that I want to speak about really quick. There were the Girgashites, who they were in charge of um, the curtains and the coverings within the tabernacle. And that is visible work. So when the tabernacle is assembled and people approach, they see the curtains. So try to get a visual if you can, or go online and Google the tabernacle, and you'll see a lot of different pictures. And hopefully you get a great visual of what the tabernacle looked like, and you can see the curtains. And then the Kohathites, they get the ark and the lampstand and the altars. So these are the most sacred objects in all of Israel at that time. These were the most sacred objects within the tabernacle. And think about that responsibility they had. I'm sure had a bit of anxiety or something, understanding that they were accountable for the ark, the lampstand or the menorah, and the altars. That was some deeply significant work that they were responsible for. But then look at the Merarites. Look at the Merarites. They got the frame of the tabernacle, the frame. So they got the frames, the bars, the pillars, and the bases. So they got the structural components that everything else rests upon. Everything else hangs on that. So without the Merarites' work, there is no tabernacle. But when you think about it, nobody probably looked at the bases and said, "What a beautiful job that is." Nobody stands before the frame of the tabernacle and weeps with awe. No, they reserved that for the ark, for the lampstand. But The Merarites did the essential invisible work, and God named them. He named them. He recorded their ledger. He counted their numbers. There were 3,200 men of service age. They were the largest of these three clans, these Levitical clans that we're speaking of here. And he gave them the most physical labor, but the least visible glory. And if you are carrying frames right now, catch the metaphor here. If you are carrying frames right now, like if your work feels more structural and invisible and essential, but unacknowledged, then you are doing the work of what the Maronites did. And God has your name in his record as well. Remember, without the frame, without the structure, without the bars, there was nowhere to hang the curtains. There was nowhere to place the ark and the lampstand and the altar. So even though nobody spoke about the frame, their work was essential. And so he said, take a census of all the congregation of the sons of Israel by their families, by their father's household, according to the number of names, every male, head by head, by families, by father's household, according to the number of their name, head by head. It was name by name. God counts every individual. Now, let me bring this forward to the new covenant. In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 6 to 7, it says, because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are not an orphan in God's camp. You are a known child crying out to the Father who counted you personally. Personally. And then Luke chapter 12 and verse 7, it said, we already mentioned it. I said, even the hairs on your head are all numbered. So the God who counted all of those people in numbers by name, he is still counting. And he has not become less precise about his people. And then Psalm 139, one of my favorite passages in the Bible, Psalm 139. Oh Lord, you have searched me and you known me individually. So before Midbar, before in the wilderness, before in the desert, before the census, God searched you and he knew you. So the census is number one, is a moment in time, but it reflects a permanent reality that God knows your name. That ought to make someone feel good about themselves right now. That ought to encourage somebody. That ought to motivate you. That ought to get you up and start seeking, even in your wilderness journey, even in some difficult and challenging times. This should actually encourage you. So let's look at the application here. God claims what he values. He claims what he values. Point number two, proximity to the presence is an inheritance. Mm, mm, mm. You did not earn your way to the presence. You were given access through the blood of Yeshua. So you have to treat that as the gift that it is. Every task has a name on it. Every task. Their assignments were not general. They were very specific. They were clan specific. They were family specific. Within those three tribes, within the Levites, within the Levitical family, each family carried specific items. And God is that detailed about what he assigns. And the question is not just, am I serving? But the question is, am I serving in the assignment that has my name on it? Ask yourself that. Lord, am I serving in the assignment that has my name on it? And then point four, the invisible work is just as sacred. And if there are any Mararites under my voice, the sound of my voice, please know that doing the structural, unglamorous, essential work that nobody applauds, I want you to say this directly. God has my name. Say it after me. God has my name. He counted the Merarites, and he gave them the largest clan. The invisible work is the foundation everything else rests on. And let's move on to chapter 4. Every family had a task. So again, the assignment was specific and the accountability was real. And I want you to know that your assignment is very specific. And if you're unsure, you may be unsure about what your specific assignment is. I I encourage you to take some time and seek the Lord and spend time in His Word and in prayer and ask Him, what is your specific assignment? What is it that you are accountable for? So we're going to move on to chapter 4 now. And chapter 4 takes everything that we learned in chapter 3 and it gets even more precise. So in chapter 3, we learned about the clans. But in chapter 4, we're going to learn the inventory. We're going to learn exactly how the holy things are to be covered before anyone could approach them. So just again, I'm going to say this again, and I have it in my notes here. God has not called you into a general assignment. He's not satisfied with just a general assignment. He wants specific tasks with specific protocols and specific accountability because the work is holy and the work matters. And we have to look at what we do for the Lord as something that is truly set apart and blessed. God hasn't called you into a general assignment with some loose expectations. He has called you into a specific task with real accountability. And so the question that we have to ask is, have we received the assignment and whether we are walking in that assignment faithfully? That's the question. Instead of again looking at this book with a bunch of numbers and counting, look deeper. Look deeper. And so here we are. We're going to talk about the Kohathites and the covering protocol. I want to just slow down here a little bit. So before the camp could move, before the Kohathites could touch anything, Aaron and his sons had to go into the Holy of Holies first. They had to cover the ark with the veil of the screen and then a covering of dolphin skin on top of that. And then on top of that, there was a cloth of pure blue. So it was very specific how things had to be covered. And then it was only after the ark was completely covered could the Kohathites approach. Again, God, God is very specific. He is a God of order. And so they did the same with the table of showbread. They did the same with the showbread, with the lampstand or the menorah, the gold altar, and every utensil in the sanctuary. Each item had a specific covering protocol, and then everything was wrapped and carried. In verse 20 of chapter 4, it says, "But they shall not go in to look on the holy things, even for a moment, lest they die." That's very sobering. This was all. You got to think, and it was appropriate. It was appropriate amount of awe and respect that had to be. You had to have a certain way to approach the most holy God and the holy things of God. They can't be handled casually. They require preparation, covering, and protocol. And so, whatever it is that you carry, whatever God has placed in your hands, whatever He has trusted you with, it deserves to be handled with the seriousness that is due. Just the other day, just the other day with Cross to Cross Ministries, something came over me. And, you know, Cross to Cross is an umbrella of it has different pegs. And I'm going to reveal that soon. Some of you already know about it. But in that moment over the weekend, I began to feel the weight and the seriousness of that call. And I literally said to him, Lord, all of this which you have given me, I give back to you because I can't do it without him being the center because it's not about me. So I'm making sure that I handle it with the seriousness that it is due, with the respect, with the set apartness that it is due. Are you doing the same with what God has called you to do? Let's look at how we can apply chapter 4. So, point one, your assignment determines your protocol. Again, the Kohathites could not walk up to the ark and grab it. There was a specific sequence, a specific covering, and a specific approach. And the sequence was not optional, it was the condition of safety for everyone involved. If God has given you a sacred trust, He has also given you a right way to handle it. Absolutely. Point two, not everyone carries the ark. We tend to celebrate the people carrying the most visible things. That's what we do. We like, for instance, we want to honor the preacher, the worship leader, the one on the platform, but we neglect to honor the person who has been faithfully showing up for years to do that structural work that nobody notices. But without the frames, there was no tabernacle. So without the people doing that structural work that nobody sees, we wouldn't have what we have in the body of Messiah because every joint supplies. And point three, there is a season for active service. The Levites served from age 30 to age 50. That was they served 20 years in active tabernacle service. And God built rest into that design. So if you are in a season that feels like less than your full capacity, ask God whether this is a season of preparation or a season of service, or is it a season of transition? Because all three are legitimate. You just have to find out from the Father, which season are you in? And then finally, point four, covering and accountability go together. The closer you are to something holy, the more important the covering. If you are operating in ministry or spiritual leadership without accountability or without people above you who have access to your life, then you are unprotected. That's the principle here. Covering is not a threat. It is not to be abused. It's not to be lorded over you. It is considered a gift and it should be treated as such. So, how is Midbar? How is this Torah portion still speaking? Let's go over it. God still counts his people individually. Yeshua calls his own sheep by name, and the language of the census, named, known, numbered, runs from Numbers chapter 1 straight into the New Testament and even into Revelation. And you also have to understand that the body is still organized. God still places members as he wills. Remember, they have spiritual gifts that are distributed by the Spirit, not by human selection, though that happens, but he distributes this gifts as he wills. Yeshua began his ministry at exactly the age the Torah prescribed for Leviticus active service. 30 years old. That is not a coincidence. Again, that was precision. And then even Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 that God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as he willed, not as the individual wills, but as God wills. It's not supposed to be by a vote or by election, but it is as God wills. And the same God who positioned each tribe in Numbers chapter 2, he positions each member of the body. So Midbar is not something that we should look at as just ancient history. No, it is the blueprint for the New Testament that the church has been built upon. So look at how Midbar lives on from the Torah to the New Covenant. We went over quite a few of those reference scriptures. Take a screenshot, do what you need, come back to it, but that is important. I want you to take that screenshot and begin to study those scriptures. Read Numbers chapter 1 and through verse 4 and chapter 1 through chapter 4. Read it and then look at those cross-reference scriptures because you're going to learn the new covenant is not a replacement of the Torah. It is the Torah brought to its fullest expression in the person of Yeshua. And now, for those of you who want to take it even further, go ahead and look at those discussion questions. You know, find out what God has called you to do, journal it. Or if you're meeting with someone going over these lessons, go ahead and talk it out and see where everyone is. Find out where the prayers need to be. What are you listening for? Be honest when you answer these questions because these questions show you how to walk it out. Ephesians 4 and 16. I'm going to read it. From whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love, being fitted and held together. Look at the language that Paul is using there. He's using the same language that you are finding in the tabernacle, fitted together, held together, each individual part working according to its proper function. And the growth of the body comes from every part doing its specific assigned work. This verse right here, it does not describe a body where some parts work and others just watch. No, it describes a body where every joint supplies, every part works, and the whole is built up in love as a result. And if any part is out of position, or if it's not working or not fulfilling its specific assignment, the body does not build up as it should. So the growth is contingent on the proper working of each individual part. That is how you can apply Numbers chapter 2 to the church. That camp order that we learned about in Numbers can be applied to the body of Messiah. So you are a part of it all. You're not just somebody who's observing. No, you are a part. You are a joint that supplies. You are a member of this body and you have a specific function that the whole body needs in order to grow. Remember, Midbar says you were counted in the wilderness, and Ephesians 4 says you were fitted into the body. And both of these are saying the same thing from two different covenants. One, the original covenant, and the other one is the renewed covenant. The original covenant was written on tablets of stone, but the renewed covenant has those same laws, but written on your heart. You are not generic. You are specific. And you are not somebody who's anonymous, just somebody in the background. Nope. You are named. You are not optional. You are necessary. I need you to know and understand that. Thank you for joining me today, as always. What was revealed to you today requires a response. Always take it back to the Lord and move according to how He leads. Listen, this is Cross to Cross Ministries, a prophetic voice for life crossroads. Can you do me a favor? Listen, I need everyone who has listened. I appreciate every time you listen to the video, but I need you to please do something for me. Like the video. The reason why I always ask you to like the video is because YouTube will then put it up in the algorithm more. Why save this teaching just for you? Don't you want other people to get this truth? So like the video. And if you know somebody who can benefit from this, who just feel like they're in the wilderness and God has forgotten all about them, no, let them know that they're named, they're positioned, and they are called. Share this video with them. Comment and let me know what you got out of this particular teaching. Let me know what stood out to you. What was one new thing that you've learned? Subscribe and hit the notification bell because, as you know, there are several teachings on this channel. I appreciate you all. Please go in what the Lord has called you to do specifically and be positioned in that. Shalom.